Hello, everyone. This is the Mind of Lilith, and thank you for joining me for a brief astrological reading for Sean Diddy Combs. For this presentation, I'm going to look at the aspects in his chart that indicate sexual abuse or sexual deviancy. Now, I'm not saying that everyone with these aspects is an abuser or an abuse victim. I'm also not saying that anyone with these aspects is a sexual deviant, but the purpose of this analysis is to identify the specific aspects in his chart that match up with the rumors that we've been hearing about for decades. I'm not here to malign or attack Diddy or gloat about his issues. So according to Astro.com, Diddy was born on November 4th, 1969 in Harlem, New York. I do not have a time of birth, so I will focus on the planetary aspects and not the houses in his chart. Diddy has a stellium in the sign of Scorpio, including the Sun, Mercury, and Neptune. The Sun is at 12 degrees of Scorpio, combust Mercury at 4 degrees of Scorpio. When Mercury is combust the Sun, the native is very intelligent, but can also be narrow-minded, foolhardy, arrogant, and a know-it-all, which prevents them from accepting advice or guidance from individuals who they see as beneath them either financially, socially, intellectually, or professionally. It is also difficult for Mercury combust individuals to think and communicate rationally, because the rays of the Sun, aka the ego, burn up the natural qualities of Mercury, which are objectivity, adaptability, focus, etc. With the Sun in Scorpio, Diddy's ego expression is associated with obtaining and demonstrating power using money, deception, violence, and or sex. With Mercury in Scorpio, Diddy constantly thinks about power dynamics and uses other people's resources to increase his own personal power, like energy harvesting. This is one of the reasons why the sign of Scorpio is associated with the spider, which weaves complex psychological webs to entrap its unsuspecting prey. For unevolved Scorpios, because this is not all Scorpios, some Scorpios aren't like this. For unevolved Scorpios, Mercury combust the Sun in Scorpio can increase paranoia, jealousy, obsessiveness, intrusiveness, manipulation, and acts of violence. Because Pluto, the dispositor of the Sun in Scorpio, is in the sign of Virgo for Diddy, there may be desperate attempts to hold on to power via the workplace. And Pluto in Virgo makes a trine to an exalted Mars in Capricorn at 29 degrees, square Saturn in Taurus at 4 degrees. Now, this Mars-Saturn square is not a square by sign, but it's a square by degree. So there is still a conflict between expressing the sensual nature of Taurus in a way that does not jeopardize Diddy's business, Capricorn, or social status. Saturn in Taurus, square Mars in Capricorn, trine Pluto in Virgo, indicates torture and ritualistic abuse to satisfy sensual desires. Whenever Virgo is involved in an aspect, obsessions and rituals are a possibility because Virgo obtains perfection through repetition. It is one of the signs of addiction, and I think that all the mutable signs are predisposed to some sort of addictive behavior, but Virgo obtains perfection through repetition, and it completely submits itself to who or whatever it is serving as an act of self-sacrifice. So it's not a coincidence that Cassie, Diddy's former girlfriend, has a Virgo Sun, which unfortunately activated Diddy's Mars-Saturn-Pluto configuration in his chart. In her deposition, Cassie stated that Diddy insisted she wear a specific nail polish color and following his instructions to the letter. I believe that level of specificity and exactness and control is facilitated by this Pluto and Virgo placement. So Diddy's Neptune is 15 degrees away from his Sun at 27 degrees of Scorpio. When Neptune is aspecting the Sun or its dispositor via the conjunction, opposition, or square, it is easy for natives to fall into addiction, or they can hide their actions, their intentions, or their motivations, especially in the sign of Scorpio. The late Queen Elizabeth II had Neptune square her midheavens, so her crimes against humanity were unaccounted for, as she hid behind the power and the prestige of her title, as well as the fantastical projections, Neptune, of her adoring followers. For many years, Diddy was able to hide in plain sight, the Sun, because of his fame, money, status, and prestige. Diddy also has a stellium in the sign of Libra, including a strong Venus in domicile at 22 degrees conjunct Jupiter at 21 degrees, and Uranus is at 6 degrees of Libra. Venus is the planet of money, women, romance, and sensuality, and Jupiter is the planet of excess, abundance, enjoyment, and hedonism. With Venus conjunct Jupiter, it is safe to say that Diddy had access to lots of money and lots of women. It was easy for him to attract women even when he didn't have a lot of money. But because it was so easy for him to attract these women, he didn't really appreciate them and they became disposable. Uranus is the planet of independence, eccentricity, deviancy, and destruction. So although Uranus is 15 degrees away from Jupiter and Venus, it is still in the same sign, which puts it in the same house. And this means that the energy of Uranus is being transferred to not only Venus and Jupiter, but also to Mars in Capricorn. Mars is the planet of masculinity, war, the act of sex, violence, and domination. The Mars-Venus square aspect sometimes indicates, not always, sometimes indicates in a man's chart a lustful hatred of women or desire to dominate or control women using violence. And with Jupiter in aspect, the violence could be excessive. There's enjoyment when it comes to inflicting violence on other people. Mars square Jupiter individuals enjoy war, sports, fighting, and opportunities to display their manhood by dominating other men violently or dominating women sexually. The domination of women doesn't always have to be the R word. Unfortunately, in many cases it is, especially if Jupiter is involved, because with Jupiter, the lustful masculinity of Mars and the sensuality of Venus is amplified to uncontrollable levels. This is the aspect of the hedonist who enjoys a bacchanalian lifestyle of drugs, sex, food, fashion, clothes, alcohol, etc. The late Freddie Mercury had a similar aspect in his natal chart. He was well known for being very promiscuous during the Pluto and Libra transit of the 1970s and early 1980s. That Pluto and Libra transit activated a large stellium in Freddie's chart, which included Mars, Venus, Chiron, Jupiter, and Neptune. I'm going to do a deep dive analysis of his chart in about a week. But yeah, with Uranus aspecting Venus and Mars, there's a strong possibility of sexual eccentricity and perversion because Uranus wants to break the rules. Vanilla is boring for Uranus. Anything traditional is rebelled against, which is one of the reasons why Diddy, I believe, never got married, and he was never faithful to any of the women in his life. Now, Uranus aspects are really good for creative types, artists, musicians, writers, whatever. Because they break the rules and they have unconventional ways of communicating, creating, speaking, dancing, singing, or whatever that inspire the collective to think about things in different ways. So Diddy is credited with transforming the music industry as far as fashion and the sound in the 1990s, and that can be attributed to his Uranus, Venus, Jupiter aspect in his chart, okay? So most people have their little kinks and fetishes. I'm not here to judge or shame anybody for that. But unfortunately, in Diddy's case, due to the influence of Jupiter and Mars in that square aspect, he took this deviance to an extreme level that became obsessive and destructive thanks to the influence of Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, and Neptune. Now, Mars is referred to as the lesser malefic and Saturn is referred to as the greater malefic. When these planets form a dissonant aspect, i.e. a square opposition, or even a conjunction, which is not technically an aspect, but when these two planets are at war with each other, the native can become ruthless, cruel, sadistic, vindictive, selfish, uncompromising, a bully, or a dictator with no compassion, no empathy, and no patience for people who don't follow their rules and do things their way. It is difficult to live with these types because although they're capable of a strong, deep, and immense love for their loved ones, they have a really hard time letting down their guard and going with the flow because both Mars and Saturn like to dominate. Mars is aggressive and Saturn is passive. And these people have a hard time regulating the turmoil within them, so they need to control their external environment. And they're not a big fan of surprises. In many cases, Mars square Saturn natives were victims of or witnesses to abuse where they felt angry, weak, and helpless at the same time. And so they have a lot of anger inside of them that they have to learn how to manage in constructive ways. In Diddy's chart, Mars and Saturn are aspecting Venus and Jupiter. Diddy's anger is triggering his sadistic hedonism and hatred towards women. Also with Chiron and Aries, at some point in Diddy's life, Diddy may have felt powerless and felt like he was a burden. He may have felt emasculated and also like he didn't deserve to live. So with Saturn opposite the sun, Diddy's lack of empathy for others is a reflection of the lack of empathy he has for himself. He is currently going through a Chiron return, and this situation with him, with law enforcement and whatever's happening with his criminal cases is forcing him to deal with his deepest wounds of powerlessness and shame. Although Diddy's Mars is exalted in Capricorn, it is afflicted by its dispositor, Saturn. So the very things that brought him wealth, fame, and success will be his downfall. With Venus being the dispositor of Saturn, the downfall is ushered in by a woman, okay? So back to Saturn and Mars. Saturn is the planet of imprisonment, torture, long-term abuse, and with Saturn, the objective isn't to kill you, is to keep you alive long enough to continue the abuse. Mars, especially when communicating with Uranus, is the planet of sudden violence, brute force, and the R word itself. So I didn't discuss Diddy's moon, which I think is also important because the condition of the moon determines the nature of our emotional needs, if we can get what we need, and our ability to be emotionally intimate with our loved ones. Now, in Diddy's chart, this is very interesting because Diddy has the moon at 8 degrees of Virgo in the same sign as Pluto at 26 degrees. Although this would not be considered a conjunction by degree, the dark, intense, chaotic energy of Pluto is still transferring to a very sensitive and vulnerable moon in Virgo. With the moon in Virgo in the same house, Diddy's mother has a deep psychological stronghold on him. Diddy's moon is not only forming a healthy trine with the planet of Saturn, but it's also forming a pretty good aspect of a sextile with his sun and Mercury, okay? So for him, his mother is his source of security and strength. But Saturn is making an opposition to Diddy's sun and his Mercury. So it's like his feelings for his mother is preventing him from getting close or intimate with anyone else. Is preventing him from committing to one other woman or a man or whatever. And this is triggering some sort of anger within him. The way she raised him is almost like she kind of raised him to be loyal to her above all others. Or with the Pluto moon conjunction, there's a possibility of like emotional incest or lack of boundaries between mother and child. It's almost as if she has a Svengali hold over him in a way that no other woman could. So he couldn't get really close to Kim Porter or Cassie because of his mother's influence. That's what I suspect. I don't know how she raised him, but obviously something went very wrong because his mother's influence may be one of the reasons he cannot emotionally connect with another woman or to another woman. Pluto conjunct the moon can indicate feelings of betrayal between mother and child. The child may feel like they were forced to take care of their mother or their parents. They feel like they didn't have any boundaries or privacy or intimacy or security. Some lines were crossed while he was growing up. And with the moon forming a trine with Saturn, Diddy is both emotionally unstable yet stable at the same time. It's almost like someone who's consistently unhinged. So you know what you're going to get from Diddy. You know you're going to get some level of deviancy, some level of anger, but it's like he's consistent with it. There's no surprises when it comes to him. You know he's violent. You know he has emotional issues. You know he has drug problems. So it's like he's consistently inconsistent or deviant. It's very strange. There's a possibility with the Saturn forming in conjunction with Uranus that he has a split personality or he went through immense trauma that profoundly affected his self-esteem. He does have Saturn opposite the sun and Chiron in Aries. I think his deep insecurity is triggering his anger towards all women. Diddy may have a love-hate relationship with his mother, which is why he also has a love-hate relationship with other women, right? Now, before I end this, Diddy's Chiron in Aries opposes Uranus, Venus, and Jupiter. Diddy does not love himself. Okay, that's quite evident. The chart kind of indicates this. So he uses women and money to kind of bolster his self-esteem. But unfortunately, with Jupiter and Neptune, the more you get, the more you want. And so you become addicted to the high that Jupiter and Neptune is giving you until you destroy yourself. With Neptune in the same house as Diddy's sun, Diddy most likely suffers from some sort of addiction to intoxicants like drugs and alcohol. And since the dispositor of Neptune in Scorpio, which is Mars, makes a square to Venus and Jupiter, drugs and alcohol are involved during the mental, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse of women, okay? Now, I'm not going to discuss his homosexual behavior in the context of this reading because that's kind of unethical, but I hope that I was able to shed some light on why these allegations have been following him since the 90s. So just to close this out, there is a really significant T-square involving two malefics, Mars and Saturn and Venus. And in astrology, T-squares and grand squares represent significant areas of tension where the person has to learn how to manage the energies of the planets included in those configurations. So for Diddy, his T-square includes Mars, which represents men and masculinity, Venus, which represents women and beauty and money, and Saturn, which represents authority figures, father figures, older men, men in positions of power. During his younger or formative years, Diddy may have felt like his sense of agency or power was compromised or stripped away from him by other women, by men, and by men or people in positions of power or authority. And so this violation of his personhood may have made him very violent, vindictive, malicious, dangerous, petty, Unfortunately, Diddy is like demonstrating all of the negative qualities of this particular T-square. He is what you would call an exemplar or textbook case representation of the negative manifestations of two malefics being involved in a T-square, including Mars, Saturn, as well as Venus and Jupiter, which are benefic. So malefic planets like Saturn and Mars take control or dominate benefic planets like the Moon, Jupiter, and Venus. So unless there's some sort of balance, this configuration becomes self-destructive. Malefics are destructive by nature, right? So when you have these malefics in a T-square or a grand square or an opposition or a square in general, whatever benefits that were given to the person by way of Venus or Jupiter was taken away because of Mars and Saturn. Mars and Saturn are considered to be selfish planets in a sense, and Jupiter and Venus are not selfish. They're planets of opportunity, gift giving, graciousness, abundance. Now, Diddy with Jupiter conjunct Venus is very, very generous financially. He will spend lots of money on you, but that's a method of control because Mars and Saturn are still an aspect here. So if I buy you a bag that costs $15,000, I'm just doing so to, appease you so that you can remain loyal to me, or you won't tell on me, or there's there's some element of manipulation here. Because again, Mars and Saturn are about maintaining power at any cost. So if I give you a gift, you had better believe that I want something in return, right? All right, guys, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to post my chart analysis for Lark Voorhees for the Stargaze members tomorrow. If you want to order a personal reading from me, the link is in the description box. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll speak to you soon.